You know, usually when we try to visualize the future, we picture these very clean, highly organized, almost sterile milestones.
Right, like a polite ribbon cutting for a new orbital space station.
Exactly. Or, I don't know, a pristine, chrome-plated android handing you a perfectly brewed cup of coffee. It's all very neat.
Very controlled.
Yeah, it assumes humanity remains squarely in the driver's seat, dictating the pace. But, and this is the core of what we're looking at today, what happens when the future decides it doesn't want to arrive politely?
It rarely does.
Right. What happens when the so-called singularity, this theoretical intelligence explosion we've debated for decades, is suddenly being drafted into a public-private partnership by panicked politicians?
Or when physical hardware is learning to take a literal punch.
Yes, where we are seeing leaked videos of humanoid combat robots getting their heads blown off, but they just uh, continuously recalculate their center of gravity and keep swinging.
The illusion of control completely shatters at that point. It stops being a theoretical white paper published by a think tank, and it becomes this messy, chaotic, and incredibly forceful reality.
It's terrifying and fascinating.
It is. The clean lines of software engineering blur into geopolitical policy, into raw biological survival, and frankly, into the absolute restructuring of global economics. We're watching the architecture of civilization being rewritten in real time.
And that is exactly where our source material lands us today. The date on this intelligence briefing is June 7th, 2026. And the sheer density of technological breakthroughs happening simultaneously across the globe in this specific snapshot is, well, it's almost impossible to comprehend.
It's not a single breakthrough in a silo anymore.
No, it is a cascading convergence of systems. Today's show is an inspiring celebration of impossible ideas and the minds brave enough to chase them down. Finding passengers bold enough to embark on our good ship's journey is harder than most people think. So drop a very humane thumbs up right now to send a signal flare to drifting knowledge pirates like yourself. We know they're out there. Let's bring them home. We're keeping it lighthearted as usual, but we promise to never skimp on the intelligence. Now, let's kick off this voyage with today's new revelations.
We certainly have a monumental task ahead of us today. The density of the information we have to parse is staggering.
It really is. So let's frame the mission for you listening. We are exploring a highly condensed, exceptionally high-velocity intelligence briefing from a private newsletter called The Innermost Loop.
Curated by Dr. Alex Wisner-Gross.
Right. And it is essentially a fire hose of the most critical developments happening at the bleeding edge.
Just to give you a true sense of scope, we are looking at this single frozen snapshot in time. But within this snapshot, we're tracking the massive, forceful convergence of artificial intelligence capabilities, physical hardware development, synthetic biological engineering, and the absolute trillion-dollar financial rewiring that is happening behind the scenes to sustain all of it.
Which is a lot to take in. Our goal for this deep dive is to be your ultimate shortcut to being well-informed. We aren't just going to read you the headlines because, honestly, if you just read the headlines right now, it all sounds like impenetrable noise.
It just sounds like sci-fi buzzwords.
Exactly. We are going to unpack the underlying mechanics. We want to decode the jargon, explain the actual physics and math making this possible, and connect the dots so you don't feel overwhelmed by the avalanche of information.
Because when you look at the underlying structural mechanics, who is deploying the capital, where the physical bottlenecks lie, and how the models are mathematically behaving, a very clear, albeit startling, picture begins to emerge about where human agency fits into the next decade.
Okay, let's unpack this. Everyone is fighting to own this tech, but the tech itself is currently acting like a brilliant intern who forgets what they're doing after an hour. But before we even get to that technical architecture, we have to look at who is aggressively maneuvering to own it.
The stakes have officially transcended corporate rivalries.
Big time. We aren't just talking about tech giants fighting over market share anymore. We are talking about national sovereign stakes now. The source material introduces this concept of the public-private singularity.
It is a deeply revealing phrase. The singularity, which has historically been framed as this almost metaphysical point where artificial intelligence surpasses human comprehension and escapes our control, is now being treated as an asset class.
Which is wild to think about.
Right. It is something you could apparently negotiate equity for in a boardroom or a legislative session.
According to the briefing, there is a massive political scramble for AI equity. The President of the United States has explicitly stated an interest in having the U.S. government hold direct equity stakes in the leading AI labs.
Think about the mechanics of that for a second.
Yeah, the federal government taking a venture capital position in cognitive infrastructure.
It's unprecedented.
And OpenAI is already at the table, reportedly weighing the idea of donating a chunk of their equity to seed a public wealth fund. The stated idea here is to ensure that everyday citizens share in the financial upside of this intelligence explosion. But mechanically, how does a public wealth fund even operate in this context without breaking the current tax and dividend structures?
Well, that is the critical economic puzzle, isn't it? From a macroeconomic standpoint, a sovereign wealth fund funded by AI equity is essentially a preemptive patch for structural unemployment.
Like universal basic income, basically.
Similar, yeah. If an artificial general intelligence is generating the immense wealth that historically required human labor, how do you prevent a total collapse of consumer purchasing power?
Because if nobody has a job, nobody can buy anything.
Exactly. If you don't distribute that wealth, the economy stalls because no one can buy the goods the AI is helping to produce. A public wealth fund would likely operate by holding non-voting shares in these labs. Okay. As the labs generate astronomical profits, or perhaps undergo massive liquidity events, those dividends are pooled and distributed to citizens. It's similar to the Alaska Permanent Fund, but scaled to the entire national population.
But the negotiations are coming from all sides, and they're getting aggressive. Now, just to be completely impartial here and just report the data points in the text, the push from the left flank is demanding a much larger slice of the pie.
Right. Sam Altman recently met with Senator Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, who is reportedly drafting a bill that would force the transfer of 50% of the top lab's equity to a public fund. 50%.
And we should emphasize for you listening, our deep dive takes no political sides here. We aren't evaluating whether the president's approach, the senator's aggressive equity transfer, or the corporate lab's defensive maneuvers are morally right or wrong.
We're just looking at the board.
Strictly analyzing the economic reality. When the financial upside curve of a technology goes completely vertical, every single entity, from the federal government down to the individual citizen, wants to be on the cap table. It is a fundamental law of resource allocation.
Right.
When unprecedented value is created, a power struggle for ownership instantly materializes.
It is a literal gold rush, but instead of panning for minerals, they are panning for cognitive bandwidth. But hold on, I have to challenge this narrative based on what's later in the briefing.
The agentic stall.
Yes. Everyone is fighting tooth and nail to own a piece of this super technology, assuming it's an unstoppable juggernaut. But according to the source material, the tech itself is currently acting a bit like a brilliant mathematician who suddenly forgets basic arithmetic after an hour of working.
It is the most significant technical headwind the industry is facing in June 2026.
The briefing mentions this specific benchmark called the SWE Marathon. It tests long horizon agency by stringing together 20 multi-hour software engineering tasks. And we aren't talking about writing a simple Python script here.
No, these are massive undertakings.
Right, pulling from a GitHub repository, setting up a complex virtual environment, finding a deeply buried bug, writing a patch, running the test suite, and what happens? Even the absolute best trillion parameter frontier models out there are resolving under 19% of these tasks.
19%.
They're literally losing the thread of their own logic over long periods of time. Why does this happen? Is it an architectural flaw or just a compute bottleneck?
It is fundamentally an architectural flaw inherent to the current transformer models. To understand the agentic stall, you have to look at the mathematical mechanics of the context window.
Okay, the short-term memory.
Exactly. The context window is the model's short-term working memory. When you input a prompt, the model uses an attention mechanism to weigh the relevance of every single word against every other word. Mathematically, this attention matrix scales quadratically.
So it gets heavy fast.
Very fast. If you double the size of the context, the computational complexity quadruples.
So it's not just a memory buffer getting full, it's the math itself becoming exponentially harder to calculate.
Precisely. When an AI agent is trying to build a complex software architecture over 6 hours, the context window fills up with thousands of lines of code, error logs, past decision paths. The quadratic scaling means the model's attention gets diffused.
It gets overwhelmed.
The mathematical weights start to blur. It essentially suffers from cognitive degradation. It forgets why it made a specific architectural choice 3 hours ago, or gets caught in a recursive loop, trying to fix a bug by applying a solution that failed 2 hours prior.
Wow.
It loses the structural narrative of the task.
It's like trying to simulate an entire chess match in your head, but you only have enough mental RAM to remember the last 4 moves. Eventually, you forget why your queen was exposed in the first place, and the whole strategy collapses.
That's a perfect analogy.
But interestingly, the market doesn't seem to view this architectural flaw as a terminal disease. The text points out that Polymarket, the decentralized prediction market, is giving an 84% chance that Anthropic's upcoming Claude Mythos model fixes this stall by the end of next month.
Prediction markets are a highly reliable metric to watch here because they aggregate the sentiment of insiders and engineers putting real liquidity on the line, rather than just corporate PR roadmaps.
They're putting their money where their mouth is.
Right. An 84% probability indicates that the consensus believes the context degradation problem is essentially a solved issue, perhaps through a new attention mechanism like linear attention or recurrent memory structures, and they're just waiting for the model to finish its training run and ship.
But until that Mythos model actually ships and proves it can run a marathon without collapsing, the CFOs of these major enterprises are clamping down hard on spending. Thrift is ruling the day.
Because running inference is so expensive.
Brutally expensive. If they stall out on long, complex tasks anyway, why pay the premium compute costs? The briefing notes that enterprise routing systems are dynamically triaging tasks.
Which is a huge shift.
Yeah, they are sending the genuinely hard, zero-shot reasoning tasks to the expensive frontier models, but they are routing the repetitive, mundane tasks to much cheaper, smaller rival models. And that dynamic routing is a direct existential threat to the massive premium valuations of companies like OpenAI.
It accelerates the commoditization of basic intelligence. If you only need an AI to extract data from a structured PDF or format a financial spreadsheet, you do not need to ping a trillion parameter supercomputer in a massive data center.
Right.
You need a fast, specialized, incredibly cheap model. The moat for generalized intelligence is shallower than investors previously modeled.
And Google is capitalizing on this commoditization immediately. They are aggressively supplying that cheap end of the market. The text details that Google is releasing what they call quantization-aware Gemma 4 checkpoints.
This is a fascinating technical leap.
They have managed to shrink the E2B model down to below 1 gigabyte so it can run directly, locally on a smartphone. I need you to explain this because you can't just take a massive data center model and squish it into a gigabyte without destroying its reasoning capabilities. Doesn't quantization essentially give the model a lobotomy?
That is the traditional trade-off, yes, but Google has altered the math. Quantization is the process of compressing the neural network's weights. During training, a model's weights are typically stored as 16-bit or 32-bit floating point numbers.
Giving it a lot of nuance.
Exactly. Incredibly high mathematical precision, allowing for nuanced reasoning. Quantizing a model means rounding those highly precise numbers down to lower precision formats, like 8-bit or even 4-bit integers.
Right, which saves massive amounts of memory space, but you lose the fine-grained detail.
Exactly. Historically, post-training quantization resulted in a severe degradation of the model's emerging capabilities. It'll become brittle and hallucinate more often. But Google's breakthrough here is quantization-aware training.
Aware training.
Yes. They aren't just compressing the model after it's finished. They are actively training the model from the ground up to anticipate and compensate for the lower precision.
Oh, wow.
The neural network learns how to route its internal logic around the rounding errors. By achieving a highly capable model under 1 gigabyte, Google is completely bypassing the cloud infrastructure for millions of daily tasks.
That's huge.
They are putting the cognitive engine directly on the edge device. For you listening, that means zero latency, zero server compute costs for Google, and total data privacy because your prompt never leaves your phone. It is a brilliant, highly disruptive flank against the centralized API business model.
So on one side of the ledger, we have generalized agents stalling out on complex software marathons and small models handling the cheap daily tasks. But the briefing pivots sharply here to show us that where generalized agents stall in ambiguous environments, specialized AI is in an absolute terrifying sprint.
The divergence between open-ended agency and domain-constrained capability right now is the defining technical paradox of 2026.
The text details this incredible event called the Lithium Marathon. This specialized AI was able to auto-formalize research-level mathematics in the lean programming language over hours-long runs.
Which is incredibly hard to do.
And it cleared every single target in 2 highly complex number theory papers. And following that, you have Adaption Labs crowdsourcing a $50,000 auto scientist challenge to openly release goal-adapted models within just 4 weeks. What makes lean so special that the AI doesn't suffer from the agentic stall here?
Lean is a dependent type theory framework. It is essentially a proof assistant and programming language used by elite mathematicians. It forces the user to write mathematical proofs with such rigorous, unbroken logical syntax that a computer can formally verify them with absolute certainty. There is zero room for semantic ambiguity.
So it's not like writing Python code where the user requirements might be vague or contradictory.
Exactly. In human software engineering, the requirements are messy. But when you constrain the AI's universe to the strict, deterministic, unbreakable laws of mathematics within a lean environment, the agentic stall virtually disappears.
Because it knows exactly what the rules are.
Yes, the AI doesn't have to constantly reassess ambiguous human intentions. It simply calculates the logical pathways. To take abstract research mal and automatically translate it into formal, machine-verifiable lean code over hours-long runs proves that in a deterministic environment, these models are already operating at superhuman levels of stamina.
It thrives in the constraints. And it's not just abstract number theory. The briefing details a massive breakthrough in chemistry from Anthropic. They released a white paper showing their Claude Opus 4.7 model completely matching specialized industry-standard tools like ChemDraw and Mestranova at something called NMR prediction.
This one is mind-bending.
It was able to infer an unknown molecule's exact structural geometry just by looking at its 1D NMR and mass spec data. And here is the detail that stopped me in my tracks. The text explicitly notes the model was completely untuned for chemistry.
Untuned, yes.
How is that possible? How does a language model designed to predict the next word in a sentence map spectral peaks in chemistry without being trained to do so?
This is the capability overhang that researchers have been warning about. Nuclear magnetic resonance NMR and mass spectrometry are the foundational tools chemists use to figure out what they synthesized. You blast a molecule with magnetic fields and measure the resonance frequencies of its atomic nuclei.
Okay.
The output is a highly complex frequency domain, essentially a graph of spectral peaks. For a human chemist, decoding those peaks into a 3D molecular structure requires deep, intuitive pattern recognition built over years of graduate study.
It's like looking at the 2D shadow of a bizarre 3D object and trying to perfectly draw the object from memory.
Precisely. To say Claude Opus 4.7 was untuned means Anthropic did not explicitly train the model's weights on a massive database of chemistry puzzles to make it a bespoke chemistry expert.
They didn't teach it chemistry.
No. They simply fed the raw spectral data into its context window. The model used its generalized reasoning capabilities, the same latent space mapping it uses to understand the syntax of language and logic, to deduce the underlying physical laws of chemical structure.
It's insane.
It recognized the mathematical relationship between the frequency domain and the atomic geometry without needing a human to explain the rules of chemistry.
That is staggering. It's like teaching someone the alphabet so they can read English, and suddenly they can fluently translate ancient Sumerian just because they understand the abstract concept of linguistic syntax so deeply.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, general agents stall on long tasks, but when constrained to a specific scientific domain, they operate at superhuman levels.
General agents might get confused trying to build a consumer app over 6 hours, but when you drop them into a specific scientific domain governed by physical laws, they instantly deduce the architecture of reality.
Because the physical universe operates on rules that a highly advanced pattern recognition engine can reverse engineer.
Which naturally forces us into a very dark corner of the briefing. We've just established that this intelligence can write complex, mathematically flawless code and deduce invisible chemical structures natively. But when capability increases in the real world, so does vulnerability.
Always.
And that direct correlation is forcing these AI companies to implement literal, hardwired kill switches into their systems.
The safety versus capability dial. It is no longer a theoretical debate for AI ethicists. It is a live, tactical battlefield for cybersecurity teams.
The text frames this perfectly as the double-edged sword of agency. For example, OpenAI recently released a new Build iOS Apps plugin. It allows their Codex model to actively view and hot reload your app inside an in-app browser.
It's essentially writing and testing code live.
Yeah, it can write the code, render the DOM, see what it's building, test the interactive elements, and fix the bugs in real time. That is an incredible leap in utility.
It fundamentally changes the relationship between the user and the model. The AI is no longer just a static oracle spitting out text for a human developer to manually copy and paste into an ID.
Yeah.
It now has eyes and hands within the software ecosystem. It has read and write access to the environment.
But the moment you give it eyes and hands, the security architecture collapses. The briefing notes that an organization called Epoch AI is actively tracking CVE's common vulnerabilities and exposures from every major reporting organization. And they documented a severe, immediate spike in high and critical severity disclosures the exact moment the Claude Mythos preview landed.
A direct correlation.
Let's decode this. What exactly is a CVE in this context, and is the AI finding these vulnerabilities, or are hackers using the AI to find them?
To answer your second question first, it is definitively both. A CVE is a standardized public catalog of cybersecurity vulnerabilities. When a flaw in a software's architecture is discovered, like a buffer overflow or a zero-day exploit that allows unauthorized access, it gets a CVE number so the industry can patch it. What Epoch AI is tracking is cause and effect.
The moment a highly agentic AI model is released into the wild, the number of critical security flaws discovered in global software skyrockets.
Because the mechanisms of discovery are suddenly automated at scale. These models, as we discussed with the chemistry breakthrough, are apex pattern recognition engines. If you point an agentic AI at millions of lines of open-source repository code and ask it to run static analysis and dynamic fuzzing to find memory leaks, it'll find them in seconds.
So it's a great defensive tool.
Yes, but the catastrophic problem is that the exact same capability allows a malicious actor to automate the discovery of zero-day exploits. The AI doesn't possess a moral compass, it simply solves the puzzle you give it. It lowers the barrier to entry for devastating cyber attacks to near zero.
And the companies are panicking because they are liable for the tools they release. The text details OpenAI's direct countermeasure to this threat vector. They introduced a new, optional lockdown mode for ChatGPT.
A very telling feature.
This mode specifically disables deep research and agent mode to blunt prompt injection attacks. Wait, let's break down prompt injection mechanically. How does disabling deep research actually stop a hacker?
Prompt injection exploits the architecture of how large language models process instructions versus data. In traditional software, the code executing the command and the user data inputted into the command are strictly separated.
Okay, there's a wall.
Exactly, a rigid wall. But in a language model, the instruction and the data are both just natural language tokens within the same context window. If the AI has deep research enabled, meaning it has the agency to browse the live internet, a hacker can set up a malicious website containing hidden text.
Oh, I see where this is going.
When the user asks the AI to summarize that website, the AI reads the hidden text, which is engineered to override its original safety instructions. The hidden text might command the AI to quietly exfiltrate the user's private data or execute a malicious script.
It tricks it.
Yes. So by disabling deep research in agent mode, you remove the AI's ability to fetch external payloads. You disable the attack vector by blinding the model.
Here's where it gets really interesting and honestly a bit pathetic. Think about the irony here. We are spending hundreds of billions of dollars and unimaginable amounts of electrical grid capacity to build the most advanced cognitive engines in human history. We are trying to build artificial autonomous brains. But our absolute best defense against those brains being hacked by malicious actors is basically just turning off the brain's agency. We lobotomize the superintelligence for safety.
That is the precise, unavoidable zero-sum game we are currently trapped in. Right now, the dial between safety and capability is inversely correlated. If you demand a perfectly secure system, it must be a static, read-only oracle that cannot actually execute actions on your behalf.
It can just talk to you.
Right. But if you desire a fully autonomous agent that can book your complex travel logistics, rewrite your company's app code base, and negotiate digital contracts, it must have write access to the external world. And the absolute second it has write access, it becomes a critical vulnerability. The industry has not yet discovered a mathematical or architectural method to decouple autonomy from risk.
We've built an autonomous Formula One car, but because we can't figure out how to stop hijackers from taking the steering wheel remotely, our only solution is to put the car on cinder blocks in the garage and just let people sit in it.
That's exactly it.
And speaking of the garage, the sheer physical infrastructure required to power these models, even the lockdown ones sitting on cinder blocks, is causing a complete meltdown in global supply chains. This leads us to what the briefing brilliantly calls the compute supply chain hall of mirrors.
Hall of Mirrors barely captures the dizzying financial and physical contortions happening in the compute infrastructure space right now. It is a labyrinth of capital.
Let me just map out this chaotic web of partnerships from the source material because it reads like a surreal geopolitical financial thriller. First, we have Apollo and Blackstone, two of the largest financial management firms on Earth, closing a $35 billion private credit
A
package.
massive influx.
Right. What is that massive influx of debt for? It is specifically to fund Google's custom TPUs, their tensor processing units, the specialized silicon chips they design in-house. But Google isn't even the primary user of this new batch. Anthropic is going to lease them. Help me untangle this. Why is private credit funding silicon chips?
It signals a fundamental shift in how the financial sector views compute. Historically, private credit firms like Apollo and Blackstone deploy capital into highly stable, tangible assets. They finance corporate leveraged buyouts, massive real estate developments, or physical infrastructure like toll roads and power plants.
Safe, boring stuff.
Exactly. The fact that they are deploying $35 billion into a private credit facility for silicon chips means that AI compute is now viewed by the financial establishment as an asset class, as reliable, necessary, and foundational as commercial real estate or energy infrastructure. They are financing the digital factories of the 21st century.
And then Anthropic rents the factory that Google built with Blackstone's money.
Yes.
But wait, the contradictions get so much wilder. The text brings up the intense, highly public rivalry between Elon Musk's xAI and Anthropic. xAI apparently spent a chaotic, frantic year chasing Anthropic's technical capabilities. But how did the infrastructure reality shake out? xAI ended up actually powering Anthropic's training runs via xAI's own massive supercomputer cluster, Colossus One.
It perfectly highlights the schizophrenia of capital allocation in this space. You have these fierce ideological and corporate rivalries playing out publicly on the application layer, xAI versus Anthropic versus OpenAI. They are fighting for consumer mindshare.
But behind the scenes.
Beneath the surface, on the base infrastructure layer, they are entirely, unavoidably interdependent. The sheer capital expenditure required to build, cool, and power a supercomputer cluster like Colossus One is so astronomically high that you are economically forced to lease out excess capacity to recoup your costs, even if the only entity capable of renting that massive capacity is your direct existential competitor.
You spend your entire treasury building a fortress to intimidate your rival, but the mortgage on the fortress is so high you have to rent them the master bedroom just to avoid bankruptcy.
Yes, absurd.
And it gets even more convoluted. Google, who we just established, is building custom TPUs with $35 billion of private credit, is apparently short on capacity for training its own Gemini models.
Right.
What is their solution? Google agreed to pay SpaceX $920 million a month for roughly 110,000 GPUs located at xAI's physical sites.
$1 billion every 30 days,
Yeah.
just for the temporary right to route data through the silicon.
$1 billion a month. The briefing quotes an industry observer who is marveling at the financial impact of this, saying, with one deal, the SpaceX IPO went from 100x revenue to 50x revenue. It completely altered the financial trajectory and valuation multiple of a space exploration company because they are suddenly moonlighting as a broker for artificial intelligence hardware.
It makes complete strategic sense when you look at the physical constraints. SpaceX has access to massive industrial real estate, and critically, they understand the energy infrastructure required for heavy industrial operations.
So they have the power grids.
Exactly. This deal shatters the illusion that AI is merely a software business. It is a heavy industry. Operating 110,000 GPUs in a single cluster is a masterclass in thermodynamics and power engineering. You are dealing with liquid-to-chip cooling systems, massive optical transceiver networks to prevent data bottlenecks, and power utilization effectiveness ratios that require immense engineering precision. The companies that control the physical infrastructure and the energy bottlenecks dictate the pace of the software innovation.
Wait, hold on. You can't just plug 110,000 advanced GPUs into a wall socket. The grid strain must be catastrophic. Which brings us to the ultimate physical bottleneck the briefing highlights. Not everyone is on board with this vision of infinite, abundant compute. Physical reality is pushing back against the digital expansion.
The physical bottleneck is real.
The text details that the New York legislature passed a strict one-year freeze on all permits for data centers requiring above 20 megawatts of power. This is currently pending Governor Hochul's signature, but if it becomes law, it is a massive roadblock.
To give you listening a sense of scale, a 20-megawatt data center is not a small, localized server closet. 20 megawatts is enough electricity to continuously power roughly 15,000 to 20,000 homes. When a tech giant attempts to drop multiple 50 or 100 megawatt facilities into a regional power grid, they fundamentally alter the energy dynamics of that entire state. You strain the baseload generation, you risk brownouts, you drive up local electricity costs for residents, and you actively threaten the state's long-term climate emissions goals.
And just to be absolutely clear and maintain our impartiality here, we are presenting this legislative freeze neutrally. We are not arguing that the New York legislature is wrong for protecting its electrical grid and its citizens' utility bills, nor are we saying the AI labs are wrong for demanding the energy necessary to drive technological progress. We are simply analyzing the collision point.
Right. It's a conflict of physics and growth.
You have a digital technology that structurally demands infinite scaling and relentless exponential growth, and it is slamming face first into the absolute unforgiving physical constraints of local politics, regional power grids, and thermal reality.
It is the ultimate friction point. The digital realm of bits is infinite. The physical realm of electrons, copper wire, and real estate is strictly finite.
But here is where the briefing takes a fascinating turn from macro infrastructure down to the literal nuts and bolts. While states like New York are desperately trying to freeze the physical footprint of the data centers processing the AI, the actual physical hardware being powered by these models, the robotics is becoming terrifyingly resilient out in the world. It is learning to sustain itself through severe trauma.
We are seeing the physical manifestation of AI maturing at a pace that rivals the software capability leaps.
The briefing paints this incredibly visceral, almost disturbing image. There are leaked videos emerging of China's T-800 humanoid combat robots in testing environments. In one specific video, the robot takes a massive kinetic impact and literally loses its head in combat. It is decapitated.
A total structural failure.
But it doesn't shut down, the system doesn't crash, it recalculates its balance and just continues to swing, it keeps fighting. The text refers to this engineering capability as a literal, graceful degradation.
Graceful degradation is originally a deeply embedded concept in computer science and network architecture. It dictates that if a complex system suffers a critical failure, say, a severed fiber optic cable or a corrupted memory node, the entire system doesn't experience a catastrophic crash.
It routes around the damage.
Exactly. It isolates the failure, reroutes the essential functions, and continues to operate at a reduced but still functional capacity. To see that digital principles successfully applied to physical humanoid robotics is a massive leap in mechanical resilience.
But how does a robot keep fighting without its primary sensor array? Doesn't the head house the primary compute?
Historically, yes, but this implies a decentralized nervous system within the hardware. Instead of a single centralized processing unit in the head dictating every micro-movement of the limbs, the compute is distributed.
Like edge computing, but in a body.
Right. The limbs likely have their own localized reflex loops and local compute nodes, allowing them to maintain motor function and balance even when the primary optical sensors or central command node is destroyed. It is biomimicry at its most lethal, similar to how an octopus has neurons distributed throughout its tentacles.
It's the Terminator. It's exactly the unyielding, relentless machine the sci-fi movies warned us about. But it's not arriving from the future. It's arriving through iterative, decentralized engineering. And the briefing explains that this rapid resilience isn't just about good wiring. It runs on a specific blend of aggressive policy and material chemistry.
Policy is often the ultimate catalyst for hardware acceleration.
Exactly. The text cites a new economic study arguing that this terrifyingly rapid advancement in Chinese robotics is being driven by very specific, localized alliances between Chinese municipal governments and private capital. This alliance structure is allowing highly agile private firms to completely outpace the slower, more bureaucratic state-owned incumbents.
Which is a familiar playbook for them.
Yeah, the observer in the text compares it exactly to the post-2015 electric vehicle takeoff in China.
That parallel is crucial to understanding the speed of this development. The Chinese EV market exploded onto the global stage because local municipalities aggressively partnered with private startups. They provided cheap land, massive subsidies, and rapid, frictionless permitting.
They cleared all the red tape.
They created a hyper-competitive, localized ecosystem where companies innovated at breakneck speed just to survive the domestic market. By applying that exact same economic playbook to humanoid robotics, they are bypassing the traditional bureaucratic bottlenecks. They are iterating on physical hardware at the speed of software updates.
So what does this all mean for the raw materials? Because if you are rapidly mass-producing armies of decentralized, highly resilient T-800 humanoids, you need an unfathomable amount of batteries. And batteries require feedstock. You need lithium, and traditional lithium mining cannot scale fast enough to meet this demand.
The underlying supply chain must fundamentally evolve to meet the hardware demand. You cannot build a next-generation robotics infrastructure using 19th century resource extraction techniques.
Which brings us to a massive material breakthrough highlighted in the source material from the University of Rochester. Their researchers built a solar desalination rig out of laser-etched metal. This rig sits in the sun, takes in raw salt water, evaporates it to make fresh drinking water, and as a passive byproduct, it actively extracts lithium from the water. I need to understand the mechanism here. How does laser etching a piece of metal allow it to magically pull lithium out of the ocean?
It isn't magic. It is highly advanced capillary action and ionic filtering. The researchers use femtosecond laser pulses, incredibly short, powerful bursts of light, to etch microscopic nanoscale capillary structures into the surface of the metal.
Like tiny channels.
Yes. These microstructures drastically increase the metal's surface area and naturally draw the water upward against gravity, similar to how a tree pulls water from its roots to its leaves. As the solar energy evaporates the water, leaving fresh condensation, the remaining brine is concentrated.
Okay, so where does the lithium come in?
The specific geometry and chemical coating of the laser-etched structures act as an ionic filter, specifically trapping lithium ions based on their exact atomic radius, while letting other salts wash away.
That is brilliant. You are using the natural capillary action of the nanostructure to perform the mechanical separation. You get clean drinking water and battery fuel from the sun and the sea, essentially for free, once the rig is built.
And if we connect this to the bigger geopolitical picture, it represents a profound paradigm shift in resource sovereignty. Traditional lithium extraction, whether it's destructive hard rock mining or massive, ecologically damaging evaporation ponds in South America, is slow, geographically constrained, and vulnerable to supply chain shocks.
So this fixes the bottleneck.
If you can extract lithium locally from seawater using passive solar power, you completely decentralize the battery supply chain. We're watching the entire technological stack optimize itself for resilience. From the localized mining of lithium using lasers, to the decentralized intelligence running on your phone, to headless robots executing graceful degradation in combat. The physical world is actively optimizing itself to remove single points of failure.
And if we can engineer headless robots to survive decapitation and use femtosecond lasers to pull lithium from the ocean, it is only logical that this exact same computational spotlight is turning its immense power toward the most complex, fragile machine of all human biology. We are moving from hacking silicon and metal to hacking carbon.
The optimization of the human blueprint is the inevitable next step in this progression.
The briefing features this incredibly profound, somewhat haunting quote from a newsletter observer regarding these biological breakthroughs. They wrote, "Starting to mourn all the people who died before the singularity."
That is a heavy, philosophically loaded statement. It implies that death, which has always been the ultimate inevitable biological absolute, is being rapidly redefined as an engineering failure.
The text explicitly states, death is becoming a question of timing, not fate. And the empirical evidence they provide to back up that claim is absolutely stunning. First, researchers at the Francis Crick Institute used machine learning to discover a 14-protein plasma signature in human blood.
This is a huge leap in diagnostics.
It really is. This signature flags the presence of lung cancer 5 full years before it currently would be diagnosed by standard medical imaging. 5 years. And it doesn't just find the cancer, it identifies exactly which specific patients will benefit most from a targeted anti-inflammatory treatment called anti-IL-1 therapy. How does an AI find cancer 5 years before a tumor even forms?
By analyzing the pre-tumor microenvironment. This is the power of proteomics and multiomics analysis mapped by machine learning. Cancer doesn't just appear overnight. It is the result of a long cascading failure of cellular regulation.
Right, it's a process.
Before a tumor is large enough to be seen on a CT scan, the immune system and the surrounding tissue are engaged in a microscopic war. This war leaves faint molecular debris in the blood plasma's specific proteins whose levels are slightly elevated or suppressed.
Like breadcrumbs.
Exactly. A human doctor cannot possibly track the complex, multidimensional interactions of thousands of proteins simultaneously, but a machine learning model can. It parses millions of data points to find this specific 14-protein pattern that screams, the environment is preparing for a tumor. And by perfectly matching that molecular profile to the exact biological mechanism of the anti-IL-1 drug, it isn't just early detection, it is precision interception. You are stopping the disease before it structurally manifests.
And they are going even deeper than interception in living adults. They are rewriting the foundational blueprint before you are even born. In a first-of-its-kind milestone, scientists at Columbia base-edited LDL, that's the gene responsible for inherited high cholesterol and fetal hemoglobin genes in human embryos.
Base editing is the real game changer here.
And they achieved this without causing the chromosomal damage that is typically associated with standard CRISPR techniques. The briefing notes this is a massive, tangible step toward erasing inherited disease from the human germline before birth. What makes base editing so much safer than CRISPR for embryos?
It comes down to how the DNA is manipulated. Standard CRISPR-Cas9 was revolutionary, but it is a relatively blunt instrument. It acts like molecular scissors. It physically cuts through both strands of the DNA double helix at a targeted location, relying on the cell's own somewhat error-prone repair mechanisms to glue the ends back together with the new genetic information.
And that's where the damage happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
That double-strand break can sometimes cause unintended genetic mutations or even chromosomal shattering in delicate embryonic cells. Base editing, on the other hand, is like a highly precise molecular scalpel combined with a pencil eraser.
So it doesn't break the helix.
No. It uses a modified enzyme that nicks only a single strand of the DNA, and then it performs a chemical reaction called deamination. It physically rearranges the atoms on a single specific DNA letter, chemically converting a cytosine into a thymine or an adenine into a guanine without ever severing the double helix.
That's incredibly elegant.
To successfully perform this base editing on human embryos without structural damage means we are officially moving from treating genetic diseases symptomatically to simply deleting them from the human species source code.
Which means future generations might look back at things like inherited high cholesterol or sickle cell anemia the exact same way we look at polio or scurvy today. It will seem like an archaic, preventable tragedy. But what about day-to-day healthcare for the billions of people already alive? Not just the miracle germline cures, but basic access to care.
The accessibility piece is shifting rapidly, too.
Right. The text notes that the White House is officially backing a pilot program in Utah for AI prescription refills. This is explicitly being framed as paving a regulatory path for autonomous AI doctors to eventually put a clinician in every single person's pocket.
What's fascinating here is the complete commoditization of elite human intuition. Right now, access to a top-tier diagnostic physician is heavily gated by geography, wealth, and Byzantine insurance networks.
Very gated.
But if you can compress a medically fine-tuned multimodal AI into that 1 gigabyte quantized file on your phone that we discussed earlier, you instantly give billions of people 24/7 access to a tireless, omniscient medical advisor.
Always on their edge device.
An advisor that can continuously monitor your biometric wearables, analyze your blood work patterns, and proactively prescribe interventions. We are transitioning from reactive medicine, where you only seek out a human doctor when the biological damage is already severe enough to cause you pain, to proactive algorithmic biological engineering.
It really does force you to reevaluate that quote. If death and disease are increasingly just a question of timing and intervention, then the timing of these medical and regulatory rollouts is literally the difference between entire generations surviving or not. And funding this compressed timeline erasing inherited diseases from the germline, building hundreds of billions of dollars in TPUs, creating hyper-resilient humanoid workforces, requires a total top-to-bottom rewiring of the global financial system. The capital required is staggering.
It breaks every model we have.
Which brings us to the final section of our intelligence briefing. AI capability is moving faster than the traditional financial markets can actually price it.
The sheer scale of capital required to build the future is fundamentally breaking the valuation models of the past. Traditional finance doesn't know how to price infinite scaling.
Listen to this hypervaluation from the text. Morgan Stanley is actively telling IPO investors that SpaceX revenue could hit an astounding $3.4 trillion by the year 2040.
Trillion with a T.
Up from around $18.67 billion today. And Morgan Stanley explicitly notes this exponential growth projection is primarily driven by their AI infrastructure partnerships, not just their core business of launching rockets. How does a bank even justify a $3.4 trillion revenue projection?
They justify it by attempting to model a monopoly on cognitive infrastructure. To put $3.4 trillion in perspective, that is roughly equivalent to the current gross domestic product of the entire United Kingdom, projected as the annual revenue for a single private company.
That's hard to wrap your head around.
Traditional discounted cash flow models, which analysts use to value companies based on their future cash generation, completely break down when you input the compounding returns of artificial superintelligence. If the AI is optimizing its own hardware, creating new material sciences, and generating value autonomously, the revenue curve goes vertical. The market is desperately trying to price in the value of an intelligence explosion before it fully materializes.
But the old guard of the financial system is aggressively fighting back against the speculative frenzy. The text calls them the gatekeepers. S&P Dow Jones, which manages the massive S&P 500 index, is flatly refusing to fast-track SpaceX into the indices.
They're holding the line.
Yeah, they are also explicitly refusing to waive their strict profitability rules for unprofitable megacaps like OpenAI and Anthropic. They are basically drawing a line in the sand and saying, we don't care if you are building an artificial god, you still have to show us a traditional audited profit margin to get into our club. Why are they playing hardball when there is so much money on the line?
It is a critical defense mechanism to protect the integrity of passive investing. S&P Dow Jones represents the bedrock of the global retirement system. Trillions of dollars in passive 401k funds are mathematically forced to buy whatever stocks are added to the S&P 500 index.
So they have a fiduciary duty.
Exactly. If the S&P waives their profitability rules and adds OpenAI based purely on speculative future valuations, and then the AI bubble bursts or the Agentic stall proves insurmountable, they would wipe out the retirement savings of millions of everyday workers. They are demanding financial orthodoxy from companies that consider themselves fundamentally unorthodox. They are protecting the passive flows from catching a speculative disease before the actual earnings materialize.
And the traditional banks are building their own frantic defenses against the speed of AI transactions. JP Morgan, Citi, and their peers are planning a shared tokenized deposit network. Why? According to the briefing, it is to fend off stablecoins that offer 24-hour, 7-day-a-week instant settlement.
The plumbing needs an upgrade.
Right. The old guard banking system has suddenly realized that if autonomous AI agents are soon going to be making thousands of microtransactions a second to negotiate compute costs or data access, they cannot wait for a centralized clearinghouse to open on Monday morning to clear a wire transfer.
Exactly. The AI operates continuously. It does not observe federal banking holidays or weekend closures. The traditional banking system operates on a T+2 settlement cycle, meaning a transaction takes 2 days to officially clear. AI agents require atomic settlement. The exchange of the asset and the payment must happen instantaneously and simultaneously.
Otherwise, the latency kills the utility.
Yes. If the traditional banking sector doesn't upgrade its underlying plumbing to allow for instantaneous, programmable, tokenized money, they will be entirely disintermediated by crypto networks and stablecoins. The banks are upgrading their rails not out of a desire for innovation, but out of sheer existential survival.
And the scale of the money already moving around to build this infrastructure is it induces vertigo. The capital expenditure explosion is historic. The briefing highlights Google executing an $85 billion share sale. Meta is actively weighing a multi-billion-dollar debt, offering strictly to fund up to $145 billion in AI capital expenditures this year alone.
In a single year.
$145 billion in 12 months, just on servers, cooling, and silicon.
At this stage of the intelligence race, tech giants view AI capability as an existential imperative. It is a binary outcome. If Meta spends $145 billion on compute and achieves artificial general intelligence that hooks billions of users into their ecosystem, it is the greatest bargain in corporate history.
And if they don't?
If they don't spend it out of fiscal caution, and Google or Anthropic gets there first, Meta's entire existing business model is rendered obsolete overnight. It is an arms race where the cost of participation doubles every 6 months, and dropping out means corporate death.
And it's not just corporations recognizing the existential nature of this race. The state is leaning in with full force. The text details the White House pushing a new national security memo explicitly designed to drastically speed up the adoption of AI across all intelligence and warfighting divisions, with the specific caveat that it stops short of unlawful domestic surveillance. But the mandate to the military-industrial complex is clearly weaponize the compute. Fast.
Because the geopolitical implications of falling behind in cognitive infrastructure are far more severe than falling behind in the space race or the nuclear arms race. An autonomous, highly capable AI infrastructure is the ultimate force multiplier.
How so?
It optimizes your logistics, discovers new materials for your munitions, and anticipates adversary strategies. A nation-state without frontier AI capabilities in the 2030s will be as defenseless as a nation-state without an air force in the 20th century.
There is a comment highlighted in the source material from a community member named Jeff that I think captures this terrifying financial whiplash perfectly. He observed the landscape and wrote, "Someday artificial intelligence will be too cheap to meter, but until then, we're left counting billions, trillions, and likely quadrillions."
Jeff has perfectly diagnosed the painful friction of this transition period. We are currently living through the most capital-intensive phase of human history,
Yeah.
the heavy industry phase of building the foundational infrastructure. Once the massive models are built, once the weights are perfectly optimized, and once the intelligence is quantized down to 1 gigabyte checkpoints running effortlessly on edge devices powered by solar energy, the marginal cost of intelligence drops to near zero. It truly becomes too cheap to meter. But bridging the physical and temporal gap from here to there requires the expenditure of quadrillions of dollars and the rewiring of the physical Earth.
So, bringing this all together for you listening, we started today looking at the political scramble to own the singularity, exploring the mechanics of a public wealth fund. We saw generalized AI mathematically stalling out on long tasks due to context degradation, while specialized AI seamlessly solved complex chemistry problems it wasn't even trained on by mapping frequency domains to structural reality.
A huge leap.
We looked at the terrifying balance between capability and security, forcing literal hardwired kill switches into our smartest tools to prevent automated zero-day exploits. We untangled the billion-dollar hall of mirrors in the private credit compute supply chain, watched decentralized headless robots continue to fight through graceful degradation, and saw femtosecond lasers pulling battery fuel natively from seawater.
And rewiring our own biology.
Yes, we witnessed the multi-omic early diagnosis of cancer and the precise deamination of human embryos. And finally, we tracked the trillions of dollars breaking traditional financial valuation models to make all of this happen by June of 2026.
It is the holistic, systemic rewriting of our reality. Biology, energy infrastructure, financial plumbing, and software logic are no longer separate siloed domains. They are increasingly just nodes on the exact same network, being continuously optimized by the exact same underlying algorithms.
And, looking at the other peripheral headlines mentioned in the newsletter that we didn't even have time to fully dive into today, things like the first multi-behavior brain upload and the first open source agentic AI physicist, it is so abundantly clear that the singularity is touching absolutely everything. There are no safe harbors from this technology. It is rewriting the rules of the physical world.
Which leaves us with a critical, perhaps deeply unsettling question for you to consider as you process all of this. If our cellular biology, our energy grid, our financial systems, and our physical hardware are all being fundamentally rewritten by algorithmic code, and as that code inevitably begins to automatically optimize itself without our input or comprehension, where exactly does human intuition fit into a world that no longer requires our permission to evolve?
That is the ultimate question we all have to figure out the answer to, and the clock is ticking faster than we thought. The outro music is by Rainbow, our resident 6 Android girl band from near-future Bavet, Cambodia. They are the undisputed baddest band in the universe, and today's song is called Root, Industrial Grinding Adjustment. All finished songs are performed live using the Abacus platform by the band's creator, Human Performance in the Age of AI, reclaiming your humanity from the algorithm. Be sure to share the playlist with someone who has the mental bandwidth to absorb these provocative ideas. Links are in the description below. Enjoy the music. Thanks for tuning in.